Sure.
Yeah, because I've been thinking about this for a while, like the question of how do you become someone who has big visions, is able to think far into the future, and therefore more consciously, a person, how can he more consciously design his life? So one of the questions I had originally, and is ongoing, but this was a partial, you could call it a hypothesis because it's not an answer. How do you become that person? And then I asked myself, well, if I'm talking about visualizing who I want to be in great detail or what I want to achieve, it's almost an error, because maybe I can think in terms of like what kind of person I want to be, like the type, but then the specific concretes of that will vary so much that it would be a mistake to try and superimpose a very concrete vision of who you want to be onto yourself, because that would mean that you're going to be less open to facts and knowledge that would make you want to be something else. And so in terms of having then a future vision of who you are, this is my thinking now, right? In terms of having a future vision of what you want to achieve and who you want to be, maybe think about it instead of thinking about it in terms of concrete specifics, think in terms of direction. So one example might be, let's say you want to be wealthy. You say, okay, I want to be a millionaire. It's not a good example, but it's simplistic and it's good enough to illustrate the point I'm trying to make. So let's say you say that instead of saying, I want to be a shoe manufacturer who makes $1 million and does this and that, and like has this specific factory and lives in this country, just have that direction. I want to be a millionaire, at which point you're open to a lot of different potential endeavors. Like, oh, there's heaps of demand in this industry. Let me get into selling underwear. And then you can be a millionaire, and the specifics of your life will not, you won't have specifics in mind of your life, but you will have a direction. Like, okay, you might end up in Vietnam, or you might end up in Texas. And like, that seems way better than having some very specific visualized outcome. That's my thoughts on it now, as far as like, how do you think long range? And I was curious to get your feedback.
I think the general idea is right, but I think it's important to remember that the further away in time, the further in the future it is, the more open you want to be. Yes. So the less specific it should be. You should be able to visualize like what kind of thing, broadly speaking. Like you might want to say like, oh, I want to be a great writer, if that was what you wanted, or I want to be a great chess master, like good sort of like kinds of things.
Yeah.
Well, chess master might be too specific, but something broad like writer, that could work. It depends how far away you're thinking. But thinking, say tomorrow, probably want to be really concrete. What do you want to do tomorrow to get to those goals? There's fewer possibilities to go for it, so it's better to be concrete. I think, say if you want to work on, your intermediate step is, study Nietzsche, then a goal could be, I want to read some pages of Nietzsche tomorrow. That'd be very concrete and specific, and a specific goal. And you need those goals, and as you get further and further away, you want to be maybe a little more abstract, a little more indirect. That would make most sense, because the more possibilities there are, I think the less specific you want to be of yourself, the less demanding you can be, because things can change. You learn things. The possibilities are broad at first, but then they narrow, like anything.
I agree. And I think what you said, I've put some of that in this little statement that I wrote. And I actually got that from Peikoff's lecture on certainty when he spoke about prediction. And I'll put down dot points here that are more refined, which I'll go over, which is what you said. So one was, if you're like an athlete and you're practicing for a race, that's a highly delimited context, right? Yes. So and you've got, you know, the pool is set up in a certain way, you know what you're going to wear, you know that the belt, like there's going to be a sound and you have to go, like in that context, very specific concrete visualization might be a powerful tool.
Yeah.
But that's a delimited context. And then what you mentioned, the time frame of the prediction, he did say that too. Like the further out you go into the future, like 30, 50 years, the more you cannot account for. So you want to, I guess you need some baseline level of self-esteem, belief in your own self-efficacy to deal with whatever comes up. And so that is an unknown. You can't, it doesn't make sense in that case to have these super concrete visions of the future. Anyway. Yeah.
Of course, it needs to be concrete enough that you recognize that it's possible, that there is a path to get there, that there is an objective you have. But then again, sometimes you have to always be aware that you'll discover new goals, new values, new obstacles, and it might change what you need to do.
Right. So concretizing direction over, we could go direction, destination. How about that? Direction, destination is the distinction to make. And a destination would be, let's say someone wants a romantic partner and they're like, I want a 6-foot blonde Swedish lady who plays the violin and has a PhD in biology versus someone who says, I want someone ambitious and beautiful. That would be an example of the distinction between destination and direction, right?
Yeah.
And then same with Millie, you know, I don't know anyone who wants to really get into shoe manufacturing, but let's just say I want to send rocket ships into space and become a billionaire doing that. Versus someone who says, I just want to be a billionaire. Like the latter who says that is focused on direction and will likely have much more positive outcomes because they are open to this, all these different factors that they can't account for. Yeah, cool. All right. That I think my thinking on that is clarified then. Pretty good.
That could even apply to even during a race, for example. Like imagine F1 racer that they can want to visualize winning, but really there's so much unpredictable stuff that go on during the race that they need to be ready, that they change strategies. There's not just one plan. You have to be ready to change. Even if immediately you might know how you're going to take your first 2 turns or the first 2 corners you're going to cross. But after that, it gets more and more uncertain. You can visualize less and less. So you just have to go for the direction you want to win, but not necessarily the method. Yet the choices you make sometimes don't appear until you get there. The choices are when is the most concrete part, when you finally decide what's the right option.
Right. So method over goal. How would you phrase that?
Well,
method over, I don't know, whatever. But the point is the emphasis on method, right? Even James Clear in his book Atomic Habits says something like, I forget the quote, but it was
methods rather than rules.
Right.
I would phrase it that way.
Yeah.
It's not a rule to do that, but methods and principles, how to adapt your choices as you need as you go.
Right. Yeah, the quote was something like systems over, I'll even find it for you, but it was like James Clear had this quote about habit. James Clear, habits, systems.
Yeah.
Quote. Oh yeah, he said, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. There we go. So that's the same thing. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Makes sense.
And then in the example of an F1 racer, in that context, there's less there's more factors that he cannot predict. So he can't make those concrete visualizations.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to some, I've actually sprinkled a couple of, I've sprinkled some Brandon in here. So we're going to give this a try today. Narrow souls I cannot abide, for there is almost no good or evil inside. What is that? I'm just curious about that.
Well, just imagine your soul as narrow. Like there's nothing there. There's no room for anything because you're so squished. I think that's all I was really saying.
Oh, okay.
It's a funny visualization. Like you're so squished together that you can't even be good or bad. You're like the ultimate boring person. There's nothing there, neither good nor bad. He's almost
Do you-
condemning like it's better to be something than absolutely mediocre.
Right. Do you think narrow souls exist?
Yes.
What's an example of a
Probably.
narrow? Yeah.
Well, mediocre people, the average person, well, in the literal sense, like they just have wife, kids, a dog, and a white picket fence, and 2 kids. Like that sort of thing is very typical, low expectations. They just want to retire and at the age 65, and that's it. Nothing great, nothing small, or nothing evil, nothing great either. Just middle of the road.
Right. So I've thought about that sometimes. Like you can meet people like that who you might speak to and they apparently don't seem to have many ambitions. But I wonder, like, is there a depth that you just cannot reach, or that it's literally just it's not developed? I don't know. So
Hard to say.
yeah.
And it could be narrow also, and like they're on a narrow path that they're not trying to. They're trying to stay middle of the road. That they're compromising. Maybe they have strong desires, but they're on a narrow path. It's a narrow path for us all. And that way they could be narrow too.
I'll give you another one. What about narrowness interpreted through the lens of consciousness, meaning the amount of consciousness they bring to their life, to use Brandon's terminology, like how much they think and
That
go,
works too.
this is a value I want, this is a value I don't want. The capacity is always there, but it's not always exercised.
Yeah.
And so
In Nietzsche's terms, that'd be like the strength of will that you have. If you have little will, you have little consciousness in a sense. That you have little control over what you do. You have little power of your will.
I see. Okay.
So you
There's
have
a quote.
little consequence to your own life.
There's this quote, it makes me think of this.
Yeah.
This is from Musashi, by the way, but I took it as like, you can always operate on that level of focusing on the upper levels, the superficial things, but then there's a certain amount of focus, depth, and discipline that requires you to get to this depth 100 feet down. And in this case, it was referring to Musashi's training. Do you want to go on to the next one?
Yeah.
Art represents the highest task and the truly metaphysical activity of this life. As in to turn life into a play and a story and a game.
I think so. Maybe not a game, but a story that is meaningful.
Yeah.
Like of heroism, of desires, of strength. And he does express things like you should have a joyful disposition, or you should have a joyful disposition towards life and the way you live, to almost be childlike. He says that too sometimes.
Because that to him
Like
is the more natural, healthy element in man.
more creative probably too. Yeah, and more natural or more instinctual. That you're going by your power of will rather than say the herd or somebody else, or by weakness or anything. It's driven by your creative power.
Was he influenced by the sophists a lot?
I don't know. I think he was pretty negative about them. He made fun of Socrates a lot. He doesn't like Socrates that much.
not Socrates. Socrates hated the
But-
sophists.
I know, but I don't think, I mean to say that he would hate the sophists even more, is what I'm thinking. I don't recall what, I recall some quote, but I can't think of it offhand.
The reason I thought about that was because of what you said in this, with this life is art, is that the sophists thought that the natural element in man, the true part of him, is his desires, and that his goal was to throw away this reason, all these arbitrary dictates and social conventions and traditions and all that rubbish that was just inherited and is artificial, and to just like burn himself with all this arbitrary passion and desire in any way possible. So that's why what you said made me think of that. So I wasn't sure if there was like a link.
The sophists were just, I don't know if that was usually what they were, why they were hated so much though. I think it was more that they never tried to argue genuinely. Nothing they said was genuine. It's just everything's arbitrary. It doesn't seem like they believe any sense of truth.
Right.
So, I mean, not even that would be true, it seems. Like they argue that because they can argue it. Their intent is just to win arguments. And maybe make the more intuitive arguments are that way. But I think he would commend them for merely speaking to speak, but not to mean anything.
Okay, let's go to a Brandon quote, which is the next thing.
Sure. Someone's mind. Isn't a motivator a feeling? Well, a motivator is the thing that makes the feeling. I mean, it's not the feeling itself. It's the object of motivation.
It's the object of motivation.
I mean, I guess a motivator can be a feeling, but not all motivators are feelings. It could be like a concrete thing. So in
What
this
do you mean
case,
it's the object of motivate the
the direct object of the verb. That's what I mean.
oh,
Or not the, yeah.
so is it just saying that the self-esteem generates a motivation, and so that motivation can be strong or very low in feeling, and so it functions regardless of feeling?
can.
That's maybe.
Well, it can bring on further action. If it is a motivator, it causes action. Well, yeah, you could have feelings that are motivators if they cause action. It sounds fine to say that. Yeah, I just said object of motivation. The motivator is what leads you to seek an object or seek a thing. But it's the cause of it's the efficient cause.
That,
What
hey,
leads
there,
you to begin.
yeah, there
what?
is something else here with feeling, because I can feel like I want to do one thing, but I'm motivated to do a different thing, right? So it's like there are sort of contradictory elements at play. In a sense, like, for example, I've set my goal today not to check my phone until later in the day, even though I really feel like checking my phone. But I also, I'm motivated not to. So there's a distinction there, right? They're both feelings, but they're counter to each other in a sense. One is stronger. One is like, it feels like the feeling to check my phone is stronger, but the motivation beats that feeling. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's that distinction between feeling and motivation. There's something that is distinct.
We could be motivated by and motivated to. Motivated by is motivator. What you're motivated by is the motivator.
Yeah. Or to take from Plato and Aristotle, the spirited element is with me. That's what I learned.
That could work too, yeah.
Okay. Next Nietzsche quote. Aphorism.
Yes. I didn't actually know about himself. Probably reference to Socrates, of course, but
I like this quote a lot, by the way.
Know thyself. Yeah. Yeah.
So we
I-
can't ever lay ourselves on a table and literally dissect ourselves, but
Yeah.
or rather the way I took this, and maybe he did, I don't think he meant it in this way, but when I read this, I was just thinking that's true. But to me, that means that all knowledge requires a kind of method. I said study, but I mean a kind of method or process to acquire. And that includes studying yourself. That there's a certain method and process required. Even for that, it has its own tools. And so just as we discover the coils of our own bowels and the rapid flow of the bloodstream by a process, a certain method, and then a process of abstraction, so too must we do the same to study ourselves. That's what when I read this, that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the important thing is that you're answering the questions you asked. That in a way you're seeing that, yeah, you can't, things are concealed from you. So how do you deal with that? This real truth there, that you can't just look at yourself from the outside because you're there. There's some kind of bias always there. So if you recognize that, then of course you need to find the tools given to you to figure out what that, to get around that deception. And bias is a deception. And bias is a thing that can happen naturally. So I think that's kind of what this is pushing you to acknowledge.
Right. Okay. I thought it was beautifully written, so I
Yeah.
put it in because I liked it.
Yeah.
Where I don't comment, I have no idea what he's talking about, but I was interested.
A liar is a person. Valid designations. So I mean, they're still just saying true things, or rather logical things.
But why is this?
A
Okay, I get
sophist.
it. Like what's
Just to be a
revealing
sophist.
about this? What's revealing about this? Because it's like, yeah, obviously a liar is just someone who says something and it's false. But what is added here in his little
Valid
aphorism?
designations, just like a sophist. They say things that are logically true, but they don't say the truth. They play word games. They trick you. They don't mean what they say. They say one thing when they mean the opposite, but they use words to trick you. So in a way, he's just that type of person. He's not making a judgment per se. That's why to be careful with Nietzsche, but that is a liar to Nietzsche. So anyone actually that says something logically true to make something just appear real is a liar. Anyone who that might be, doesn't matter their intentions or anything. It's just that's what makes a liar.
But what is that? I don't really get what that adds to my understanding of liar.
The appearance of truth, saying true things or logically true things doesn't really mean anything. In a way, it's saying that it's that what they ultimately say is whatever they want to say, whatever they want to mean. Which we could get into thinking about, like certain thinkers are just say things logically true, like maybe like Plato said a lot of things logically true, but if they're valid but don't mean anything that he says, and would he be a liar? It was not even real, really real. Just appearances he talks about.
Right.
Could call Kant a liar because he only dealt with like these pure abstractions or desire to. So he would say things that aren't really true. But Nietzsche might also say like, but at least that person tries to create the world in their vision, at least. That's what he's also saying, that remember like the truth and non-moral thing, the other essay we read. I mean, in ways he admired people who can create something new. And he almost thinks everyone's a liar. Everyone lies about their beliefs. But that's just getting really deep into deep cuts of Nietzsche.
What did I want to say about this quote with Aristotle?
You mentioned it
think-
last time.
Yeah, I did. There was something I wanted to add to it, which is, Brandon talks about self-esteem in a way that made me think of this. He talks about, like it's a kind of condition that you come back to even through difficult periods. It's like an equilibrium of some kind. And so it made me think of if there was a connection there to Aristotle, but I don't remember the exact quote, so I'm probably gonna. All right, let's go to the next aphorism. You can measure the worthiness of a goal by your willingness to perish for it. I would maybe formulate it as something like that.
Yeah, that's what he's saying, I would say.
Yeah.
He actually sees value in the suffering too.
What value does he see in the suffering?
Well, maybe actually not clear through this. It's just an example rather than showing that he actually says that. What purpose? Oh, wait. What's the beginning of that? For what purpose? For what purpose does it exist? I'm not sure what he means by purpose here. He might mean like purpose as in like a purpose inscribed into us intrinsically.
Yeah, I interpret it
Not
that way
sure.
too. Like, don't look for some purpose beyond yourself. Don't ask, why is humanity? Why does man exist? Why am, ask yourself in the terms of, why am I here? What am I going to do? That kind of thing.
Do you know which book this is from?
No, I found it. I don't even know if it's his aphorisms, but there was some website that listed 300. They called them aphorisms.
It's one of the earlier ones. The way it's written makes me think it's like one of the earlier ones. His different attitudes later on. He's not as positive like that later on. He's more like, yeah, just more early stuff. I think it's important usually to know what time period he wrote it though, because it reflects a lot of whether it was before Zarathustra or after.
Right.
I think it matters, which it affects him a lot.
Let's go to Aristotle, mixing it up.
Sure.
So this was a passage he wrote about. He tried to draw these parallels between children and parents, and then settling into knowledge and this kind of thing. So maybe we'll read it together. We can skip the poem for now, but then we can get to it at the end.
Where's this from, by the way?
Sachs's introduction to Nicomachean Ethics.
Oh. Habits, type of habit. Habit of yielding to impulse can be kind of.
What did you make of him saying if the time is out of joint? So the purpose of the adult is, from what I got from this passage, is that the purpose of the adult to help educate the child is to stamp out, or to help him develop temperance or an ability to manage his desires. And then from there, that's just the baseline. And from there, you then need to start implementing virtues.
Seemed just like a weird statement, like time is out of joint.
Yeah, I don't know what he's. See, he writes like an academic
know.
in a small room. That
I would
has
usually
no-
just skip it. Usually I just
Okay.
like don't glaze over that. It's like doesn't seem important. That's
Yeah,
usually
okay.
what I would do, honestly. It didn't seem
Okay.
essential, so I just skip it. I mean, it's not worth the time.
Yeah,
I
cool.
mean, I
Let's
probably
skip
could
it.
figure it out, but it's one of those things. Like it's just an intro. I'm really just trying to get a sense of what I'll be reading, and I
Mhm.
don't usually take too much on that. Sometimes I
Okay.
never read until I finish the translation. Actually,
Right.
depends on the book.
Okay.
I only read the intros actually because I'm already familiar. But if I was starting fresh, like Willie did with Nietzsche, I never read the intro.
Right.
I just jumped into it. So that way I won't be biased by any interpretation but my own. Then I could get the idea of what's going on.
Next aphorism.
Without forgetting is quite possible. Without forgetting is quite impossible.
I think this one needs lots of context. I have to guess, like, oh, he just means forget concepts that, traditions and all the random social conventions. That
even
have
the
been-
usual sense of forgetting in the usual sense, even forgetting what you've already learned is even something that you need to do. In a way, it's like living more by what's inherent in you, by your will and your power, rather than necessarily something created from the outside. So in a way, you don't want to remember always what you've want to be as much as being what you are. You can't always remember what you did. Or if you did remember everything, you would lose sight of that, I think is what he's saying. Ultimately, I mean, yeah, it takes context, but in a way else you can interpret it however you want. Well, if you did forget something, if you never forgot something, why would that make life harder? Would it?
I don't know.
People would probably easily say like, without forgetting, it seems like forgetting is always bad, but maybe why would it be impossible? It's a very weird statement.
Yeah, might need more context of his ideas, but I thought these were supposed to be somewhat self-contained, right?
Yeah, but some are just like a weird, just it hits you, and that's all it's supposed to do. It's just forgetting good, like you just think like that's weird, and
Yeah.
it just makes you stop. I think that's kind of the point of it. Not even so much it says something profound as much as it makes you stop for a second
Yep.
and not take for granted that you assume that forgetting is a bad thing. You pause for a moment and think about, what does it serve to forget? Why might they want to forget? It actually makes you stop to consider it.
When something, oh yeah, you're right. When something was irrelevant to your life, but it was painful, it's no longer relevant now. You've extracted what value you can from the experience. You've reflected, you've integrated that reflection and knowledge, and then why remember the experience if it's painful?
Yeah, and I don't think Nietzsche would say that, but it doesn't matter what Nietzsche would say here. It's about how you respond to what he said is what counts. That's always what Nietzsche like cared about. It doesn't care if you agree with him. It cares if you thought about it. That's all he cares about. Even if you think it's the most wrong thing ever, he just wants you to think about it.
Got a Brandon quote.
Sure.
And then my thoughts on it, which we can, it's not so much a question as it is a thought and then discussion.
Sure. Yeah. Seems, yeah.
This relates to the what I mentioned about that person I met who they have some kind of traditional astrological chart reading every month.
Yeah. Yeah, this would make sense for that.
Yeah.
I mean, as we said, of course, not all mystics will be passive, but anyone who is passive would lend themselves to being mystics, I think. Like the other way would work for sure. Like, yeah, if you don't trust yourself, you will be passive. You're less likely to even reason things through. You'd be more likely to accept the supernatural. And therefore, passivity could lead to that, or is a possible sign. Like mysticism is a possible sign of passivity. That's how I read it.
I wonder if you could get then this passivity, you could have either passivity to life or hatred of life then. Those are the two alternatives, in which case you are active in terms of actions, but they're destructive actions.
Yeah, you could say that, yeah.
Yeah.
Or irrational, which effectively is destructive actions.
Right.
I mean, irrational action is always essentially destructive, no matter how well intentioned.
Aphorisms.
Yeah.
What's that? What does it mean, like a number?
Goes into it only exists in the now completely. There's nothing that remains for later or before. It only exists in the now, absolutely unhistorically. There is no past or future. It's just now, completely concrete bound.
Like a number?
Yeah, number. Well, I don't know what's with that metaphor. You just seem to want to use the word remainder. Maybe it's wordplay that works in German. I'm not sure. Because that sounds like wordplay. It sometimes he does that.
Ah, yes. Yeah, you're
So,
right. You're right. Like a number, like a natural number, a whole number, or whatever. Yeah, okay. Cool.
So it's the translator might be missing how to get the wordplay Nietzsche was going for.
Oh, that's interesting. And when he talks about a beast, who is he talking about?
Just like a lion, for example. Some strong predator animals, like the strong and powerful animals.
This one I found interesting because I thought the better, but the better is the better good, or and then because we know the better, but we cannot do it.
That one doesn't sounds very un-Nietzsche. Doesn't sound like a way. Are
Actually,
you sure this is Nietzsche?
I've got an interpretation on this. I'll look it up. I'm going to Google it right now.
Try to see what book it's in. I'm really curious about that.
It's attributed to him. I just looked it up. So
Yeah, just which book is like, because I'm really curious about that. Like, it's it must be like Daybreak, which
on the
like
use
his
and
first
abuse
book.
of history for life.
What could that be from? That must be a
I got
chapter.
I got an interpretation of it,
Sure.
but it's pretty, I know, banal and not that interesting. But the interpretation is just, it's that whole, all that about, done is better than perfect. What is it? Like, just get something out there, just do it and do something good, even if it's not as good as you want it to be. Just all that stuff.
Well, this is not even doing anything. It's saying I'm not going to do something because there's something better. I can't do that either.
That's what I mean. That's the same
Yeah.
thing, right? He says because of that, because we know the better, we cannot do it, so we stop at doing the good.
Yeah. That would
Anyway,
make sense.
Not that interesting then, for me.
I don't find it that interesting. Like, it doesn't sound like Nietzsche. That's why
Well,
it
it is.
perplexes me.
Yeah, I just googled it, abuses of history, and
I wonder
yeah.
what that's from. Because that's not a book either.
Thoughts Out of Season, Part 2, the use and abuse of history, something like that. Anyway, whatever. It wasn't that interesting.
Yeah.
This one.
Like, yeah.
What I mean
This
to
must be
stop.
from Zarathustra.
What would it mean to stop taking yourself easily, and then to be thyself? What I never understood is like, be yourself. You are yourself. What does it then mean to be yourself beyond just already being yourself?
Continue being yourself. Like, be that. I mean, I know it's kind of vague. I mean, in a way, it's just you do have to take for granted what he means by be, like to be yourself. Maybe we would want to say it's be follow your nature, but he doesn't quite mean it that way. He just means live through your strength, I guess, your will as it is. Don't try to be something you're not. Don't try to change into something else too different. It can be a bit confusing, but like stay true to yourself in a way.